Sorted 3 is a productivity application for the Apple ecosystem. And in this video, you're going to learn all you need to learn in order to use it with the Getting Things Done method. Before we dive into the setup in detail, let's first look at the settings, which you can find in the left bottom corner by pressing on the gear symbol. Under General, you'll find settings that are mostly personal preference, related to styling, item spacing, sounds, and notifications. Under Date and Time, it's a bit of both, because some of these have to do with what you're used to, your time format, when does your week start, etc. The one setting I want to point your attention to is the duration setting, which has to do with time estimation for tasks. By default, you'll see 4 options here, but you can adjust them. And I recommend adjusting them to the following 4 options, from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 minutes. By default, if I recall correctly, there is an option that goes as high as 90 minutes or more even. And in my opinion, that is just too long. In that case, it is barely even considered a single task any longer, but rather it's probably a sequence of tasks that you've misnamed. And to ensure that every task is accessible, that you do not procrastinate, etc., I recommend breaking it down to an atomic level as much as possible, and having these options helps accommodate that because they will be pre-selected, pre-available from any task in Sorted 3. Beyond this setting though, again, most of it is personal preference. Make sure that the show inbox icon is turned on for easy access. You can integrate your calendar as well. Sorted 3 has a couple of powerful scheduling features there. And if you use Sorted in a public space often, and perhaps you sometimes forget to lock your computer, then this may be a handy option which basically puts a password in front of the app so that any sensitive data, which is likely that you'll have it in there, is protected. Once you're happy with your settings, just press done and they'll be applied. Let's now look at capturing, the first step in the GTD process, which is all about emptying your head with ease so that you can move on with your day. Nancy, the nurse, will surely have lots of things come up related to her work or anything else that she'll want to park for later to process. The first way to do it is by pressing plus here. You'll be prompted with a menu that allows you to enter a name for a task or an event which will be placed in your calendar if you have that set up. But I think it's good that it's by default in the inbox as well as a new task, since that's going to be most of it. So you can press plus. Another way to do it is by pressing Command plus N, the keyboard shortcut, and you will see the very same menu there. If we open the navigation bar at the top, you will be able to go to File and select New Task from there, and again, the same menu appears. There, she can empty her head. For example, File Paperwork for Patient 305. Save it for later, and Nancy can move on. Another way that Nancy can capture on desktop is by using desktop widgets for macOS. I've already set up 2 here, and they are obviously the Add to Inbox widgets. If you press plus, it will automatically prompt a menu that we already saw a couple times. And here's another one that allows you to also press plus, and again, we arrive at this particular menu. Now, there's a couple more here. Under Edit Widgets, you can navigate to Sorted 3, of course, and from there, you can also add events if you want to, or a variety of other widgets that also include capturing functionality. Now, this next particular capturing method may not be as relevant for Nancy the nurse in particular. However, if you're using a lot of screens, if you're using the internet a lot for your work, if you're on a browser often, then you will find this quite useful. I found a way for you to just press any particular string, in this case, inbox, and then you can add anything you want to the inbox straight from Chrome. Let's just say test, press enter, open Sorted 3 app. A website wants to open this application. Say yes, open Sorted 3 app. And now you will see this item in the inbox. Pretty cool. How does that work though? What you can do is go to settings first. From there, you can go to search engine, manage search engines and site search. And you'll want to add a custom search because that's essentially what we've done. We're hacking this functionality to turn it into something new. I've already set up a couple others as well. I have a full video on how that works. But what you'll want to do is go to add. I'm going to edit the one I've already added, but it will show the same menu. Under search engine, you can give it a name. So just add sorted quick capture or anything that indicates what this is. The shortcuts option will indicate the string you need to type for it to appear. Now I've chosen to do inbox here, but you can also select something super simple and quick, like the letter S. And lastly, this is the thing that makes it all work. You'll want to copy this exact URL and paste it into this field here. I've added it to the video description and it says sorted, callback URL, add title, etc. This is the string that you're going to type that is going to replace the %s and will allow you to add that as a task into sorted. Don't worry about the details if this looks too complicated. Just make sure that you copy this exact URL into this exact field. Make sure that you memorize the shortcuts that you set up, and from there on, you can just press inbox or whatever string you've decided on and add anything you want. Open the app, and there it is. Now, these are some of the main examples for capturing on the Mac OS. There's a couple more that require some more advanced workarounds, but I think for most people, these will do the job. Unfortunately, as of recording this video, I don't have an iPhone or other Apple mobile device. However, I'm going to add some third-party footage right now for you to see how you can add to the inbox from mobile, because there are quite a few extensive options. They're pretty good, so make sure that you also use the app and benefit from all the options with widgets, with the quick plus button in the keyboard, and many others. Now, before we actually clarify something that is currently in the inbox, we need to have an organizational system for it to be clarified into. That is exactly where lists and tags come in. Open up the list section and create the following list named standalone items. This is where anything will go that has no projects associated with it. That is really, as the name implies, its own thing. These can be simple, small tasks, and an example task in that list currently, although you could argue it's actually a project, but for simplicity's sake, Nancy wants to buy a new car to commute to her work, so she wants to Google for options for finding a used car less than 50k miles. You can create additional folders and lists, and I highly recommend segmenting your focus areas through folders and adding lists for projects that belong to that particular focus area. For Nancy the nurse, we have only one in this setup, but you may have a lot more, and that's okay. Just make sure that they are organized in a way that makes sense to you. For Nancy, the work focus area folder has two lists living inside of it. They are two projects that we will look into in more detail in a moment. The next folder you'll want to create is named agendas, and this is basically where you add any talking points for particular meetings or individuals for when you see them, for when you interact with them. This is something you will want to discuss. For Nancy the nurse, we have two lists in here, one dedicated to coworkers and one for patients. Let's look at an example here. When we go to the patients list, you'll see that there is one particular quote-unquote task in there named patient 375. This implies that if we see that particular patient and we want to check whether there is something we need to bring up with them, all we need to do is search for them or navigate there as we just did, open the item, and now under details, you will see a checklist that contains the talking points we want to discuss with them. For example, this patient, it might be a heart patient, and they just have to eat less fat and get healthier. And that's something we need to communicate to them. Now, once we've done that, we can mark it complete through this checkbox here. You can add a checklist item by going to Format and selecting Checklist. Back to the lists that we've created. The next list you'll want to create is called Higher Horizons, and this is where anything that goes beyond the surface level lives inside of. For example, goals. Nancy the nurse, she might still be a nurse now, but she wants to become a doctor in the future, and for a deadline she set the end of this year. You can do so by navigating to a task, selecting time, and under Start, adding a date. Now, Start is actually somewhat counterintuitive in this case, although you could argue she will want to be a doctor and start to become one by this date. However, you might as well also interpret it as a deadline. So I just think the nomenclature here is a bit unfortunate. You can just interpret this as the associated date, and it's up to you to interpret what it means, but usually it means a sort of deadline or a due date rather than just a start date. So you can add your goals in there. Under Vision, you may have a more broad perspective on things you want to achieve in your life. For example, to find a cure for blindness that perhaps has a lot of sub-goals and projects associated with it, of course. And it's really a long-term thing. And for life purpose, Nancy has to stop people dying from preventable diseases. So as you can see, we're really zooming out as we go deeper. And that is something you can do as well by segmenting these into separate lists. For vision and goals, you will probably have multiple items. For purpose, you may just have one, but I still like to have it all just concentrated in one list to emphasize the importance, to not have it cluttered. And that is exactly what you can do by working with it in this way. You can add a folder named reference and add lists for either the category of item or the type of item. That's your call. I have no strong opinion here. In this case, we have a list for articles and we're going to fill that up in a moment, but you can also decide to do it by the topic, although I would recommend using tags for that instead. And lastly, we have the someday maybe list, which is where anything that is not currently actionable, but may become so in the future, when it's more relevant, when you become interested in it, when the time is right, or any other reason, but it's just not relevant now. That is the rule. Now, this shouldn't become a trash bin. In fact, we have a trash bin here. So let's make sure that anything you consider trash actually goes in the trash. However, an example, Nancy wants to open her own clinic sometime, but she just hasn't specified it as an active goal right now. However, she doesn't forget about it either, and therefore it's inside of this list. So now that you know about the lists, let's look at the tags, which can be associated with any individual item, with any individual task. You're going to want to create two types of tasks here. The first are context tags, which are basically conditions that need to be met for a task to be completed. In Nancy's case, she has a read context, a Google context when she needs to find stuff online, hospital context where she's often at for work, of course. And the other type of tag you'll want to add is an action state delineator. What this means is it defines whether a task is currently next up or not, or whether you are the one that needs to perform it or someone else. It's the concept of next actions. That is why we have a next tag here. However, if someone else needs to perform the task, you don't want to lose sight of it. So what you can also do is add a waiting tag, which I'm going to do by going to the right bottom corner, selecting new tag. And of course, for you, you'll want to create all the other tags like this as well. Add waiting. Let's see if we can find a suitable emoji here. Let's just do red or stop maybe. There we go. This one is perfect because it's an indication of something that we have no control over currently. All we can do is hold the other party accountable to have it done for us, right? You can also move it, which is nice. And now we have a somewhat structured context section here, as well as action states. Now, I said before, if you want to also use tags for reference, you can certainly do so, but I would recommend keeping them somewhat separate from these tags, for example, by starting them off with a dash, which is something I do in other software as well, because what this allows you to do is whenever you filter or search for a tag, you can easily delineate between action-related tags and non-action-related tags through the presence of this dash at the beginning. You just enter the dash when you search, and you'll see either the reference-related tags or action tags. So keep that in mind as you think about the tagging structure that you want to implement in your sorted 3 setup. Now let's look at clarifying. We have an item in the inbox right here, file paperwork for patient 305. Now I would say this is already pretty clearly defined for a task. I don't think we have to change anything there. However, we are first of all missing tags. We're going to assume that this is a next action, so we can select the next tag. Now, where can we perform this task? Well, I think Nancy will perform this task in the hospital. So we're going to select that as the context. Now you can see we have these tags added there. Perhaps there is some urgency involved here. So what we can do now is select the date property. And from here, you have a sort of mini calendar that allows you to set any particular due date for this task. Let's pretend that this task needs to be done by the end of this week, which is going to be January 22nd as of recording this video. So I'm going to select that particular date. And by selecting any time, you're going to remove or add a specific time of the day association. I'm going to have this on any time. You can set up reminders, which is very handy. You can alert on time or by any particular time you desire. I'm going to not do that here. And if this was a routine, then you could also set up the exact routine interval here with some advanced settings, which is nice to see. Now, this one is a one-off, but this is just to show how you can set up routines if you need to. Now, the last thing we'll need to do is move this to a list. We can do that by navigating to this inbox label and clicking on it. And from here, you'll see an overview of every list we've created and already looked at in the previous section of this video. For this one, I am going to park this under standalone items. Now, this is actually not the right way to do it, I would argue, considering my own explanation just now, because this is actually under the work focus area. However, there is currently no list to delineate standalone items within a particular focus area. We can fix that by creating a new list, standalone items. And to avoid confusion, we're obviously going to move this underneath the work folder. Now we can navigate to this list and select the item we just moved, select the label again, and make sure that we select the standalone items list that is under work. There we go. And that is how I do it. Pretty simple. Use tags, use the time association if you need to, and move it into the proper list so that the inbox is nice and clean so that your inbox regularly ends up looking nice and clean again. Now, hopefully the setup portion of the video is pretty clear, but now it's time to ask ourselves, how does it actually work in practice? We need to have a way to see things that we can do with ease. After all, it's a productivity app. We want to become more productive when we use it. Now, the classic approach to productivity tech would be to navigate to every particular list and try and find next actions in there. And hopefully we're not going to context shift too much. But in fact, that would defeat the whole purpose of context. We want to instead look at context first and then do anything we can do inside of that context and then move on to the next one to avoid context shifting, to increase focus, to get more done in less time. Now, the way to do that is by going to the next label first. Remember, this is for actions that are next up, that are available to us. But now we still see all these different context bundles. However, if you go to the right top here, you can select filter by tag. Here you can select any tag that you want to filter for in addition to the tag you're currently seeing. In addition to next, for example, if we want to see everything that Nancy has to Google, we can just select that tag. And now we'll see that whatever it is related to is also indicated, but it can be seen from the context angle. And that is super powerful, right? She just does her thing, boom, Googles this thing, finds best option. What is that related to? For a new defibrillator for at work. Okay, boom, done. And now you can deactivate the filter by going here. There are 3 next actions left. Filter by tag. Maybe she's now able to read something. Okay, great. There's an article here that we've saved related to the defibrillator project as well. Okay, boom, done. And that's how you go through it. Just make sure that you've applied the proper tags, that you're distinguishing between next actions and actions that are due later. Here's an example of how that works. If you remember, we just ticked off 2 tasks related to this particular project. Get a new defibrillator. However, we only Googled something and we only read something. We're not done yet. Let's assume that Nancy actually found an option, but now she needs to get approval from the hospital director for the purchase. Now, that is a task that we already preloaded into the system here, but to avoid it showing up as a next action, since it's a sort of a dependency on the things we did before, it does not have the next label just yet. However, as we can see by navigating to the list, there are no tasks due that are next up. That allows us to conclude that this action has now become available. Therefore, we can now select it, press a tag, and add the next tag to it. There we go. Now, if we go to the next tag section here, filter by tag, and select hospital, we can go through everything again. Once she arrives at the hospital, she knows exactly what needs to be done. And of course, if there are due dates, they are also visible here. In fact, you can also sort by time to have those appear on top to apply a sort of prioritization to it. For reviewing and reflecting on what you've done, the History tab is going to be useful. You can see that all the tasks that we've marked complete are visible from here, including the project that they were related to. However, other tags are removed from this view. You have to go to details to see them. But either way, that works well. You can filter by list membership or tag they contain to get more details on what you've marked complete in this system. And in general, I believe this system lends itself pretty well to get a sort of overview of things by having this folder and list structure to easily move back and forth between everything see if everything's up to date. When you're doing curricular review, for example, are there any projects that we could mark complete either by deleting them, or if you want to keep them, you could create a new folder that is named completed, which again applies to the list taxonomy, not for tasks, because they obviously have a checkbox. And let's say this defibrillator project is now complete. You can just move it to completed, and there you go. It's sorted. And let's move it down, and there you go. It is now hidden from view, but it is not deleted, therefore you will still be able to see it in the history. So play around with that, see how Sorted supports your reviewing and reflecting workflow, but this straightforward approach with lists and tags should do the job for you. Now, you may have noticed that I've skipped a couple of features that Sorted 3 has to offer in this review, and that is because, in my opinion, what you've seen is everything that is most essential for a true GTD working style. Sorted has a couple of extra features that you may want to consider trying, which includes an auto schedule feature that's available on the Pro version. It includes attachments as well if you want to use it more extensively as a true reference cabinet rather than using a standalone app for that. When it comes to the scheduling features, in fact, that's one of the most promoted and appreciated features by many users. However, in my opinion, it's always very risky, especially if you don't schedule it yourself manually. In my opinion, your calendar should be reserved for either appointments you've made with others or dedicated blocks of focused work that are a level higher than a specific task most of the time. Because it will base the auto scheduling on the time you've estimated for any given task. Now, what happens if one of those tasks actually takes longer than you estimated it would? In fact, this happens quite a lot. Then what happens to the rest of the day's scheduling? The whole plan goes out the window. So I've learned not to plan too rigidly and certainly not have a tool plan it for me. That is why I didn't cover that feature in this review. Other than that, most of it is actually available in the standard version. You may actually get by with using the free app, which is great because Sorted 3 is a well-designed app that offers most of what you need to run a solid GTD system. I've reviewed this tool after receiving a lot of comments about it, so if you have any other suggestions, leave a comment and I'll get to it. Thank you all so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.